Good afternoon, everybody. This is Steve Wilson, and today our webinar is on outreach strategies for working with private well owners. We're using a new version of GoToWebinar, and so I'm assuming everyone else's experience is as different as mine is. And so if there's any questions or if anything pops up, make sure you get in the chat, and Katie or Sally should be there to deal with any of it. Hopefully we won't have any glitches, but we are used to using the same software for 10 years or so, and now it just changed. I'm probably the one that's going to mess it up in the end. Is the bottom line. All right, so I'm at the State Water Survey at the University of Illinois, and so we run the private well class. And I want to mention that all this occurs because of a grant from US EPA to RCAP. Under Technical Assistance and Training Grant Program they have to support rural America, both small community water and wastewater systems as well as private well owners. And it's really about source water protection and educating the 23 million homes on private wells about what they need to do. And that's our mission, if you will, is and why we're having this webinar. It's really to look at how we can all work together to do better outreach and reach more well owners to make sure they understand why they need to test and all of those sorts of things. So I'm going to try to go forward here. Hope I didn't change anything. Okay. I mentioned this is part of an RCAP program. RCAP, the Rural Community Assistance Partnership, is a national nonprofit. It's made up of 6 regional partners. They're also all nonprofits. Together they work in all 50 states plus Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands, Guam, both South Pacific Islands and Caribbean, all the U.S. territories as well, I guess would be the way to say that. We have a 10-lesson private well class, which is you sign up with an email address and it sends you a PDF once a week for 10 weeks. This webinar is not the class. I say that every month. If you haven't taken the class, whether you're a well owner or a professional, which today should mostly be well professionals, given our topic, I encourage you to do so. When we started this class in 2013, early 2014 maybe, over 20% of the people who took the actual class lessons were EHPs, and most said, why wasn't this available when I started my job, or how can I get credit for this? Which is, we answered the second question by working with NEHA, and I'll talk about that probably in the next slide. But it's really valuable, if a good refresher, if you, even for basic geology and groundwater, if you go through the lessons. And so I certainly recommend that to everybody. This webinar is being recorded. If you want to get continuing education credit, you have to be on here live with us today. But if you're just interested in the material, you can go on our website and on YouTube and find all that. And I'll go through that later today. We didn't get many questions, probably the fewest we've ever gotten, maybe 15 or so. I didn't answer all of them. A few of them weren't necessarily weren't specific. And I wasn't sure how to answer them. But if you have questions today, you can go into the, I used to say the chat or question box, and now it's called, most of these things have new names. Oh, I guess it's the chat box. And there's a question box. I'm not sure if you can see both of those, but Katie's monitoring that, as I mentioned, and we share a Google Doc. And so she'll put all the questions that you asked during this webinar on one sheet that I'll pull up at the end once we're through the questions that we're answering based on what you put in there when you registered. So, and yeah, I know it was a minute late or so here today. There was another webinar going on through NEHA that we tried to attend, and I had to leave. So, yeah, if you have any questions, that's your, that's how you can get those answered. We'll do it at the end, and we'll stay as long as people want to stay and ask us questions. We try to do that every month. So, if you are looking for credit, CE credit, we've only offered this webinar twice ever. Once was in 23 and now in last a year ago in 25. If you got credit for this last year, and you're still in the same credentialing cycle, show an example there, you can't get credit for it twice in the same credentialing cycle. But if your credentialing cycle just ended in February and you've started a new one now in March, then you can't take this in the future until after 3/1/28 in theory. So you can email us at info@private. Well, actually, this slide needs to be changed. We've changed our registration so that now you ask for CE credit or those things when you register. So actually, don't email us asking for your CE credit or certificate, because you signed up for that when you registered, and we will provide it. Wait a week or so. If you don't get one, that's the time to contact us. But we can provide the slide deck, help with the forms, and certificate of attendance, which you should have already asked for if you wanted one. We're a NEHA CE provider as well as an Illinois LEHP provider. We haven't done that anywhere else because when we're in Illinois and we work with our county health departments closely, which I'll get into what the water survey does where we work. And it takes a lot of bandwidth to maintain those credentials, and we don't have the staff for that. This is grant funded, and so we'd love to be able to offer CEs in every state that has a program. That's just not in the cards for us. Okay, and we used to do this differently, but now basically it's a 2-hour webinar. If you want 2 hours of credit, you need to be here for the whole webinar. Yeah, and that's how we look at it. Sometimes it will run long. That's not that common, but what we look at is that you're there. If it does run long, you need to have been here 2 hours. We would hope that you're here to learn, not just to get your 2 hours in. And so, and if it goes short for some reason, then that's on us. And so if it's only 1 hour and 45 minutes, we would still give you the 2 hours of credit. This has been approved already. So yeah, again, the point's about learning and asking questions. And every month somebody asks a question we haven't had before. And so, it's valuable in the end, even if you've seen this material before, which most of you have not. So RCAP, I mentioned RCAP and the 6 regional RCAP affiliates. These are all nonprofits. They have different names. RCAP Solutions is in the Northeast, Communities Unlimited, based in Arkansas, but covers the South. You can see the different colors there. All 6 of those regions have staff that work with us on private well issues. The difference is our program is based at the University of Illinois and it's virtual. We help people through our help center and other things. A lot of times if they need physical help or help to review something on their well or whatever it might be, we recommend and send them to RCAP, one of the regions, whichever state it might be, to get a hold of them. They can help them. And so they're the boots on the ground side of our program. They're all, the leads are all private well experts. They can help put on workshops with you if you're a professional. They can provide advice to well owners if you don't have that wherewithal or someone on your staff doesn't. They can work with you to, again, put on events or give presentations for well owners or professionals. I know a lot of the RCAP staff, including us too, speak at different events, environmental health associations, well drillers associations, all those things. And so they're here to support you and the well owners you work with. And so again, it's funded through a federal grant from USEPA, which gives us the opportunity to do all these services for free to all of you and all the well owners we work with. One thing I'll mention is we developed an assessment tool, which is a very detailed 6 or 7 page assessment of a well and a property with a well. RCAP's done over 4,000 of these in the field, and sometimes they're a local health department or a state health department will ask an RCAP region if they'll go take a look at a well because they don't have the manpower or the wherewithal to do that. And so by completing all of those assessments, now they also offer a free water test to a homeowner who has an assessment done, I think in most cases, but they're great partners in all that. They can support you in your program if you don't have the funds or the staff to assist a well owner with a problem. And my undergrad in ag engineering here from the University of Illinois, one of the first things I was taught, and I use this to this day, is that a good engineer doesn't know all the answers. He knows how to get all the answers. And I think what we've done with our program is, between me and our staff, or my staff, we know a lot of people around the country. And so we can usually find somebody to get an answer when we don't know it. And so, so yeah, we don't know everything, but we know a lot of people who do know a lot more than we do. And so that's how this all works. So I mentioned the State Water Survey. There's only one other state with a water survey, Oklahoma, and that started, I think, in the 80s or 90s, but we're a state scientific survey, like the State Geological Survey and the State Natural History Survey you all probably have in your states. In 1895, the state of Illinois decided to create a water survey. So it's been around 131 years now. Yeah. And now it's an agency. We house the state's well logs. We work with our communities in Illinois with water quality and water quantity issues. When a new issue like data centers comes up and effect on groundwater resources or any other topic, we're the ones doing the work. We house, like I said, we house the state's well logs, so we have all the background data and geology. We do applied research, and we also provide services to communities and well owners in Illinois when they have questions. So it's a really great place to work, because not only do we do all the service side of things like we're doing today by running the private well class and having this webinar, but I get to do applied research, and I've, for over 30 years. And we've looked at arsenic in groundwater, lead in homes on private wells, Legionella, a lot of different topics that are important for public health. And yeah, and I don't have a PhD, which is, we keep it more practical, and the type of projects we do involve real wells, real people, and all that sort of stuff. And so it's really rewarding in that respect too, because we usually are solving somebody's problem. Just some examples of our history. We have these glass plate slides, 1,500 of them, that date back to 1900. And as I have been looking through those, scanning some of those, there's just a wealth of information about how the water survey started because of cholera and typhoid. They were a real problem. They were we were just learning around that time that they were a waterborne issue. Water wasn't treated, community water supplies. So this is an example of Quincy, when they started treating their water, just filtering the water that was coming into their plant to distribute, how it changed the amount of typhoid. And eventually, went away. We learned to disinfect and start using chlorine. And so that took care of all of that. Another example, until the late 20s, these hand pumps in public parks were really common. They were outlawed. If you've ever seen a hand pump like this, or ever taken one apart, or needed to pull one apart to get it into the well or whatever, they are just, the inside is a green slime. They're all full of biofilms. They grow bacteria. That tin cup that's on the far side of the wooden planks, that everyone just rinsed it out, took a drink. That's how you did things. And so this is an older picture as well, and you can see the water survey, I won't say briefcase, but field kit there. They were taking a water sample of this and took a picture of it. So pretty interesting stuff in the end. So on to what we're going to talk about today. I'm a groundwater hydrologist here at the Water Survey. It's the only place I've worked. I started working here as a student. I bring that up because it came up as a question today. So it's really interesting. And with me is Katie Buckley, who has been with our program almost since it started. And she's a water resources outreach specialist. She did all the organization for all the webinars we do, especially today's. And she's also the contact for our CE credit. And she'll also be behind the scenes taking your questions that you ask in the chat and putting those together so that we can get to them at the end and ask them. And Sally Dolan, who's a scientific specialist here, she's an EHP, which is great to have on staff. She manages our help center and provides answers and she's providing answers to some of the questions we have today. And I'll talk more about what we have available in a little bit. So outreach is a tough thing for private wells, mainly because they're not regulated at the federal level, and so they're typically not a priority. in a lot of cases, especially at the state or local level, there are things that are more of a priority. So a county or local health department is worried about food inspections and pregnancy and health of individuals and septic or on-site systems. But a lot of times the private wells aren't regulated the same way. And so in some states, there's really no oversight of things. And I will say that we're starting to see a change. CDC has a program where they fund 19 states or so. EPA funds us in all the RCAP regions. We're probably the two biggest players, if you will, nationwide that are supporting private well owners and the folks that work with them, and that are funded programs, if you will, and aren't charging for things. And there's other groups out there like NGWA. It's Association for Drillers and Groundwater Professionals. There's a few others, but the other one would be Extension that puts resources toward university extension, all the state land grant colleges, and there's a number of states that have really active programs. Not all though. The other problem is the differences in construction code and rules. Sometimes not even between states, but within states, and especially home rule states, a local jurisdiction can have their own rules. And we found, like in Connecticut, there's a local health district that can actually condemn a well, where in most of the state and most of the country, 99% of the country, they don't have that authority. And so that leads to a ton of differences. I mentioned permitting and well log submittal. Some states have no records, or they just started, or for instance, in Illinois, well logs became required in a permit through a county health department in 1968. In New York, that wasn't until 2000. And the difference here in New Jersey, they passed a law probably 25 years ago now that for every property sale, a well test has to be done, a water test of the water if it has a well. And that's originally that was done by the state lab, and it was only shared with the buyer and the seller. And the buyer and seller had to agree on who was going to pay the $400 or $600. It's pretty comprehensive. So we have on that end now, New Jersey gets over 13,000 water quality samples of their groundwater every year, and they have for over 20 years. So they have hundreds of thousands of water samples, really quality data. So they understand the natural groundwater quality, where there might be anthropogenic or man-made sources, all of that stuff. Where Pennsylvania is a state that still doesn't have well construction code at all and doesn't license its drillers. And I'll caveat that they do have a fee, a $60, it was $60, a fee to get a driller's license. There's no testing, there's no continuing education, nothing that ensures that someone who you or I could go get a Pennsylvania well license as a driller. It doesn't mean we have any wherewithal to actually do it. And so it's it's the Wild West in a way between states. They all have different rules and different ways of enforcing things. One state may have their local or county health involved with inspecting every new well. In other states, they don't have the manpower and or they don't have the staff, so they maybe inspect 1 in 10. So yeah, all these differences really make it difficult. Like for us, trying to provide consistent information across all the states and jurisdictions when they're so different. And so that's the first challenge, I guess, if you will. There's also not a lot of training, and this is also changing. We started the private well class. I already mentioned a lot of EHPs took our class and said, I wish this was available when I started my job. I inspect wells and I knew nothing, and there was no information available, blah, 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 blah. And that's changing. There's other programs out there. And that's one reason why we became popular. We met a need at the time. It's all free, and it's all, we vet everything that we provide. We even have a work group of professionals that help us develop the assessment tool that I mentioned, and also looking at different topics that are important that still have, still aren't resolved, if you will, like shot chlorination. There's just a lot of things out there that aren't consistent. And what that's led to are these local approaches. So it's like when I started looking at examples of documentation from around the country on shot chlorination and the process to do that, I found 70 or so. All 70 were different. Some were a half a page, some were 10 pages long. Some give conflicting information. And so, whenever somebody's like, oh, I'm going to develop a new flyer for our county, what we did is we looked at all 70 and picked one that we felt was the most accurate and the most comprehensive, and really would lead a well owner by the hand, if you will, on what to do to disinfect their well if they needed to do that. And it's from the Minnesota Department of Health. And so, without consistent funding, you may get a grant, but then if that person leaves or the grant ends, now what? You've started this program, and there's, those are all kinds of challenges that sometimes are really difficult to answer. We were working with a microbiologist here. She announced her 2-week notice and left, and right in the middle of our project. And that's just you can't plan for it, and there's not a lot to do. I mean, we will get somebody, but it's not something that it kind of puts everything in a little bit of a bind for a little while at least. So, I mean, they're real problems we all have. So today's webinar really is about outreach strategies, and it's important because well owners are responsible. I try to remind a homeowner with a well that they're the water operator for a very small water utility, just like their local community has a licensed water operator, and they have to test every 3 months, and all the rules of the Safe Drinking Water Act. You're providing water to your family, and it's just, most people do not test. That's statistically shown in different surveys and all that sort of stuff. And people don't realize the importance of just testing regularly to understand whether it's a problem or not. Sometimes groundwater is perfectly safe. And as a groundwater scientist, I would say that, we have, in some places in Illinois, we have some really good groundwater that is free of any kind of contaminant or, even elevated natural contaminants. But you don't know if you don't test. And there's areas where, there's naturally occurring arsenic or radium or a lot of things that can be a health risk. And so understanding those things as someone who's reaching out to well owners is really important when you go to talk to someone in a given area and help them understand why they need to be a good steward and why they need to test. So the other thing for today is we actually had funding from CDC. It's been 13 or 14 years ago now, to help understand why well owners don't test. Why don't they test their wells? So we did a really extensive literature review, and at the time there wasn't a lot of information out there, like research studies looking at why well owners don't test. So we started looking at behavior change and risk communication on a lot of topics: teen pregnancy, smoking, rural health problems, and the method you'd use to reach those same people is the same. It's just you're talking about their drinking water instead of tobacco use or whatever it might be. So we expanded our search, if you will, that way, and came up with a really robust set of information that led to us getting this funding. And we did a survey of 91 programs that do outreach or have educational programs for well owners. And we asked them a lot of questions about what they do differently, what worked, what didn't, were they successful, and that's really what is going to drive the train today for our webinar. But why it matters to us are these two things, really, public health protection and source water protection. Folks don't realize that their well, if they do something wrong, if something spills, can contaminate their neighbor's well or a bunch of their neighbor's wells. So source water protection is just as important, and understanding the source of where the water is coming from, if it's bedrock versus sand and gravel, all those things matter. And that's what we go through in a lot of our webinars. Groundwater and wells, common questions and testing, all that sort of stuff. And so understanding all of those facets, so when a well owner asks you a question, you're prepared, is really important if you want to build that relationship. So I mentioned this project we did. We've tried to survey 100 home programs. We have a 91 that do outreach or have education for well owners. And we also reviewed the public health communication literature, which I mentioned. And I also sent one of my staff to 3 states where they have a pretty robust well owner program that includes workshops. And she visited all 3 and went to one of their workshops to see how they do it, so to speak. And we also have our own experience. As I mentioned, the water survey is 130 years old. We well owners call us almost daily to ask questions from, hey, I have this well problem, to, hey, I just bought 5 acres in the country and I'm going to put in a house. What kind of well do I need? And we can look at all the geology and the other wells in the area. We've also have a lab that sampled over 30,000 Illinois wells, and we have a pretty good idea of, like we know the shallow Glasford Aquifer just south of Champaign-Urbana, where I live, has arsenic in it. And so if someone calls from that area, we're like, you better test for arsenic. But there's other areas of the state where that's not a problem. But we have a ton of expertise through that, and what we just do every day. And so it's those experiences, though, that really allowed us to even develop this class, if you will. And we also, again, we work with a lot of different well professionals and educators, and we lean on them when we need to. People who are corrosion experts for looking at lead or biofilms and some of those things. We've met a lot of folks, and we leverage that because they know about that specific area a lot more than we do. So this literature review really had 3 focuses: behavior change, the barriers, the motivations, and then what are the best practices to reach folks on this risk communication. So we looked at several hundred research papers, and I'll talk about that more later because we compiled all of it, and it's all available. We'll make it available to anyone who wants to look at it. It's a lot of data. And again, it's 12 years old, so all the papers are from pre-19 or 2011, if you will. And so a lot's changed in the literature on private wells since then. It's good to see that now there's a lot of research out on private wells. There used to not be any. But we looked at behavior change and risk communication, again, in general, not just on private wells, because there wasn't much there. But this is just one page of a PDF that the first 14 references of the information. I'll show you that in a minute. But it ended up, we wrote a paper. The CDC wanted us to write a paper, so we did. It was published in the Journal of Water and Health, which I'm guessing very few people on this webinar have ever looked at the Journal of Water and Health. I really don't look at it either. It's just, I use Google Scholar and look for keywords. And if a good article comes up, I'll look at it, but I don't peruse any of these journals. Don't have time. A lot of them aren't, looking at something that's so practical that it would be benefit to a well owner in the work that I do. But this paper is pretty useful. It's a strategy we're going to teach you today. It's in the webinar materials. So in your GoToWebinar window, up there's a little paper clip, and you can pull down the final version of that and go through it. But I'm going to go through a lot of it today. So the idea again was to talk to existing programs. Were they successful, or why? What did they learn? What would they do differently? And we ended up with 91 programs. And the original plan was to take a statistical look at common factors, like how much do they spend on the program, how many FTEs, how many people did they help, what kind of feedback did they get. But in the end, we weren't allowed to actually call. We had to develop a survey that they filled out, and it really limited any statistical work we could do because people are interpreting a question like how many FTEs did you use in your program very differently. If it was from a grant, they didn't include the staff that were funded through their appropriation from the state or county or whatever. And so in the end, we couldn't use any of that. But we also asked about experiences and best practices, and those ended up being by far the most valuable parts of this. And so what we developed is an approach to how to start an outreach program or how to grow one. And really it starts with understanding your audience. Every local area is different, and I'll get into some of those why. But if you're in an urban area that still has a lot of private wells, you approach it very differently than you would if it's in a very rural area where there's corn and soybeans or a lot of livestock, and the age, all those things matter. Are people reading the paper and watching the news? There's still people who do that, believe it or not. Or are they on the internet getting all their information online? All those things are different. And so all of that matters in understanding your audience and what matters to them as far as their well. Are they worried about the hog farm that's going to go in, the mega farm? Or are they concerned that, the community just found arsenic or PFAS in their well? All those things make a difference in how you should start your program. And because in the end, it's about reaching people. And if you don't understand what matters to them, it's not going to happen. So we'll go there to start with. And again, it's no one size fits all. Income level, rural, urban, level of education, past experiences. Maybe there was a spill there 10 years ago. A lagoon overflowed into a stream, and all that stuff, and that's on everybody's mind. Is there some kind of contamination? We have areas in the country where there's natural arsenic or radium, I mentioned earlier, uranium. There's just a ton of things that could be affecting water quality in an area. Or is it, a farming area where it's shallow groundwater? And we have some of those issues going on now with nitrates in Nebraska and Wisconsin and other places. Those are the things that are going to matter to folks. And how much exposure to information they have. Even politically, right, today, as divided as our country is, what kind of information are they looking at? You have two people that live next door to each other, could be on complete opposite sides of the fence and have a 100% different view of the same issue. And that makes it tough. That's just a simple way to say it. As far as understanding your audience, they do come from every social, economic, and education class. That makes, it's not like they're all rural, they're all farmers, any of those things. You find well owners in every type of place. $5 million homes with wells. We have that in Illinois versus, folks who may not even have indoor plumbing that have a private well. And what they know about their well, maybe they learned from their grandfather, it's a family farm, whatever it might be, or it's been in the house for generations, or been in the family for generations, or it could be someone brand new. We have a professor who moved from New York City in finance to the U of I, bought a cute little colonial house out in the country, had no idea that he had a well and how to deal with it. He had an idea he had a well, but he didn't really take it seriously and assumed it was all fine until he didn't have water one day. And then he called us and had no idea what being a well owner and what that responsibility meant. So, and again, it could be from a very rural area or a very urban area. For those of you who know what Cook County, Illinois is, that is basically Chicago proper. It's the innermost county along the lake that all the collar counties around it, DuPage, Will, Lake, there's 7 or so that are completely urban. And yet Cook County has a lot more wells than anybody realizes. When I say to someone, even from Illinois, Cook County's got a lot of wells. They're like, there's no way. It's all cities. But that's just not the case. So their issues, though, are very different, right? So road salt, industrial spills, these wells typically exist in small patches where two community boundaries don't line up or never matched up or was never incorporated. So they have wells and septic. And there's 3,000 wells in Cook County alone, which floors some people because it's completely urban. And this is from our well viewer that is managed by the State Geological Survey with all the water well logs. And you can see where logs are throughout the state. It's pretty cool. But yeah, this is just one portion. The map on the right is a blown up version of the map on the part of the map on the left. But yeah, there's a lot of wells. Versus where I grew up. I grew up on a farm outside Middletown, Illinois. I graduated class of 19. My grandpa hand dug our well in 1933. It's only 14 feet deep. When we'd run out of water if I left the hose on in our horse tank to feed our livestock. Every winter we had storms that kicked out our power, sometimes for several days. And there's only 3 wells even on this. This is also from the GIS version of the map viewer for the State Geological Survey. And so, when it rained hard, our well water was cloudy. There's no doubt it was contaminated from surface water, ever. But that's what I grew up on. And as unsafe as that is, my dad always swore that our well water was better than city water because the city puts chemicals in their water. That's just not good for you. And he believed that his whole life. So it's all perspective, and it shows how different things can be and attitudes, all that stuff. And so understanding who you're trying to work with is, is square one, right? And unfortunately, or not, media drives the boat, right? When there's drought, there's flooding, fracking, lead, now it's PFAS, right? All those things, to me, you should look at them like an opportunity. If somebody gets wind of a large dairy operation coming in your county and they're all worried about their groundwater, that's a chance to hold a meeting, a public meeting, and tell people about their wells, what they need to do, why they should test, help them understand if they're in Champaign County where I live, there is no surface influence on wells if it's in the Mahomet Aquifer. It's buried under 150 feet of clay. Unless the well's not properly constructed, there's no way things from the surface are going to get in the aquifer. So one place we've tested, and the nitrate levels, given this is a very agricultural area, are still below background, which it's less than 3. It's considered 3 milligrams per liter is considered background groundwater quality. And so, you need to know those things too if you're going to educate your well owners about it. But these things, again, they can be an opportunity. They're also, media a lot of times don't do those things justice, or they're looking for the sensational side of things. I've been interviewed over 100 times probably, and I've ran into maybe 3 or 4 people who make sure they have it right, sometimes even willing to let me review it, but most of the time that doesn't happen. And so sometimes they really cause us problems trying to tell the facts because they've heard an alternative fact first that isn't necessarily true. When we surveyed those 91 folks, 48 of them mentioned a local issue. That's why it's important to understand if there is one. These are some of them that were listed. Some of these were listed more than once, but that's what people are worried about in those areas. And some of these were statewide programs, some of them were local. So like the real estate transaction law, I don't remember if that was New Jersey or not, but it really made people aware that because then it could affect property values, right? And so that's why New Jersey developed their law the way they did, so that, and they even show a map of all the water quality issues in New Jersey, but they show it on a 2-mile grid so that they're not affecting any one home's property values by providing that public information. And the way the law was written, it's protected from FOIA, which I think is really smart, because it should be what we tell well owners and even realtors is it's buyer beware. You need to know what the water quality is before you buy a home or before your client buys a home. And so test and require it, right? And so all those sorts of things are best practices, if you will. But local issues really come into play. Over half, or about half, yes, over half of the folks we talked to mentioned a local issue that was driving their program. Yeah, you also need to be aware that you may get a grant, even if it's a small grant, to do a certain thing, either locally or at a state level or whatever. And then when you start talking to the folks that you're trying to help, you find out that they want something totally different. But you need to understand that first if you're going to get their buy-in, if you are going to try to meet their needs, and you need to pivot your program if that happens as much as you can, or make it mutual, right? Make it clear to homeowners that, we wrote a grant for this, but because you've identified this issue that you want us to look at, we're able to do this, and it's somewhere in the middle. Because if you don't meet their needs first, that's really your best opportunity to to have them accept you, to know that you care about their needs, that you're not just doing some project because you've got funded to do research or whatever it might be, that you're in it for them as well. And because what'll happen is if you go out and work with a well owner or a group of homeowners in an area, they will call you back. They expect you to be able to help them. It might be 5 or 10 years later, and you can't say, "Well, no, I'm not doing that anymore. That grant ended. We're not," because then your agency or whatever organization you're with just lost all their credibility and lost all their trust. So I used to work a lot with irrigators in Illinois, and I don't really anymore. We've handed it off to some of our younger staff, groundwater staff who are working on those issues. A farmer just called me yesterday and asked me to come to a meeting of an irrigation association in Illinois. And I told him I would either be there or I'd send somebody and provide a flyer, and that I'm always open to answering questions. I just have a conflict, but if I didn't, I'd be there because if you don't do those things, they know who they trust. It's hard to earn trust. It's important to keep it. It's really easy to lose somebody's trust. It's really hard to get it. And as you go through your career, if you don't know that, you certainly you'll experience it. I guarantee it. So once you've done all that, and it may not be a big issue. It may be that you've got a grant because of an issue already. So you've already identified those things, which is great. Now let's identify what are the barriers. Why aren't people doing something about it? Why haven't more people tested? All those things. Why do people say they don't care and they don't want you on their property? Whatever it might be, identifying what they see as those problems is the next step. And we've identified 4 types of barriers. They're all highlighted here: knowledge, risk perception, inconvenience, and some personal or social barriers. And so, the first question is, are they aware that there's a risk? If they don't understand that water quality, even in a perfectly constructed and pristine area of the country, could have contaminants. That's where education and correcting misconceptions, and a lot of times at this point, I'll say that's on us. We should be educating our homeowners with wells so that they do understand those basics and that they're the steward of their water supply and that they have a responsibility to protect their family and all that. But even then, if they know those things, do they actually see it as a risk? Some people are like, well, that was my dad, groundwater, it's groundwater, it's fine, but it's not. So understanding, having them understand that it really could affect their family and what that could mean is obviously the next step. And then after that, you're looking at, kind of lower hanging issues like, is it easy for them to get a test? Is it convenient in other ways? There's tons of examples of programs that have made it easier for a homeowner to either provide a water sample or whatever it might be, or they come to them. Like in Texas, Texas is a huge state. It's 1,000 miles across. The Texas Well Owner Network, every year they go to different counties to hold these meetings, working with their extension for homeowners, and they bring kits so they can do tests, and they do an hour or 2-hour presentation, and they bring it to them. They talk about local geology. They do all the things necessary to educate folks and help them understand that they can work through their county extension to get to the state folks that run the Well Owner Network. And then lastly, these personal barriers. Some of those you may not be able to do anything about. Even cases where if someone talks to you and you're an outsider, they're going to be talked to by all the other people in the area. We were drilling some monitoring wells, and folks were worried that we were drilling them for this large city, which we weren't. We were putting in 2-inch monitoring wells made of PVC, but we went into a little diner for lunch, and it was a struggle. They didn't want us there at all, and that's we weren't accepted because we're outsiders. But it could be other things too, like there's a lot of folks that are on low income or on fixed income that's not in the cards to go spend $200 on a water test to get a good look at organics, metals, and everything else. And so you need to consider those things as well. Maybe you write into the grant that you provide some of those services where there's an identified need. There's a lot of barriers that keep people from doing their testing, is the bottom line. So I showed you those references earlier, and it had like numbers 1 through 23 or something. But so that's the source on the right. It says 43, 48, 53, and 88. So we compiled a list of all the barriers to behavior change. And that's a PDF. It's one of the appendices that's in downloadable stuff here that we put on the, I forgot the name. I want to say attachments, and it's not materials, on the materials tab. But things like, barriers to behavior change, complacency. Hey, it's always, hey, my grandpa lived to be 96, and water's always tasted great, so I don't need to test my well. Those sorts of things, or contradictory messages. Going back to the media, they compound the problem sometimes because they find one person who's got a beef, and they quote them and use it as factual when sometimes it's not. And the best example I have of that is, I'm going to talk about, we have a help center where people can call us or email us. At least 3 times in the last 6 months or so, we've gotten an email or a call from someone who told us a story and how the state or the county weren't supporting them, or how they bought this property and there's all these things going on. And it turns out they don't realize that we have contacts in every state. We go and talk to all those folks and have found out they basically only gave us a little part of the story and not the important part, that the county or the state actually did right by them, and they just weren't happy with the result. And so they called us thinking that we might go to bat for them, because at least in 2 of those cases, when we went and talked to the people we know, they'd already been out there and dealt with those folks and tried to explain to them why. And then they told us why. And it's like, well, we go back to those people then and say, what about this and this and this? Why didn't you share that when you asked us to help you? If you're not being forthcoming, we can't really do our jobs. And it really, it's a black eye on them. And, yeah, so it's a real thing, right? And it's unfortunate that happens. So there's 42 of those. The last one is water's not consumed. Some people I have a well, I don't drink it though. I hear that quite a bit. And I ask people why. Did you test it and it's not good, or what's going on? Most of them say, well, it's well water. I'm just not going to drink it. There's too much risk. I'm like, well, if you've ever tested your well water, you'd know, and it's important. If you have livestock or pets, or they drink bottled water too, because there's no reason not to consume your water if it's fine, but there's no way to know if you don't test. But we have that all the time, that people just spend money on water, which is expensive. Bottled water is expensive compared to what it costs coming from your well. And it's an expense you don't need to have if your water's fine. So they can also be hard to reach. That's the next barrier. They believe it's safe. Human nature, like I said, same for dentist or doctor. This is one of the things I said to CDC I had to write a paper to get this funding. And I'm like, why don't people go to the dentist whenever their tooth hurts? Well, they're worried how much it's going to cost. People have a real fear, right, of those things. And so it's in our nature. It'll be fine. I've drank this water for 10 years and it's not bothered me. Well, all of a sudden, one of your kids starts having problems, and you figure out that it's much more, children are much more susceptible to some things, and you just shoved it under the rug because you didn't want to deal with it. So there's a lot of those kind of things. No one's ever gotten sick. Some people just I don't want the government, and unfortunately we're considered the government, even though we have no regulatory authority or any of those things, and we're there. I'm from the government. I'm here to help. I grew up in an area like that, where today I wouldn't be welcomed by most people in the country in that area, and that's just the way it is. But we try to help people that want help, and so if people don't want to, you can. There's an old saying: you can lead a horse to water. It's really true. I can tell people till I'm blue in the face that this is an issue, but if I haven't earned their trust in advance, they don't know that I'm trustworthy, or that other people can rely on me. You're not going to get anywhere if you're an outsider. So Barb Luukkonen and several others did this study. It's probably been 15 years ago now, where they sent surveys out to 2,700 basically homeowners on wells in 2 counties each in Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Michigan. And they were looking at a social experiment. They gave the folks in Wisconsin a $2 bill and a free test, Minnesota a $2 bill, and Michigan just a coupon for a free test, just to see if it made a difference in how many people responded to their survey. So you can see the numbers there. 72% when they provided both, 65%, 48%, so people didn't value the coupon for a free test like they did the $2 bill or felt like they needed to. We had her speak at our first private well conference in 2017, and she said so many people actually emailed the $2 bill back, or mailed the $2 bill back with the survey and said, oh, thank you, but I really don't feel like I should take $2 for filling this out. She said it was very encouraging. It encourages me too, right? But the important thing here is they were given a laundry list of like 20 things that they could say were reasons why they hadn't tested. Because of all I want to say that 2/3 of the people here hadn't tested that answered the survey. And of those, you can see the numbers in the lower left there. 35% were only slightly worried, 52% were not worried. And these are people who hadn't tested. And so they asked them why, and gave them this laundry list. And they can click more than one, which is why the percentages don't add up. But we've been drinking it for years. 53% of the people who have responded said that. But you can see this list in the very bottom one there, and that's not the end. That's the bottom. That's the 10. I just put the top 10 here. I don't want to know. And you think about that for a second. Why would you want to know? You can look at it like, well, that's the whole dentist and doctor thing. I don't want to know that I have a problem because it's gonna. I might have to have treatment. I can't afford it. We're going to deal with. We have to go to the doctor and find out if everybody's okay. All those things that start going through your head. Well, in Illinois, we have a law that says you have to fill out this form when you're selling your home, and it requires you to answer a question, which is legally binding. Do you know of anything adverse with your well or your septic or your on-site system? And I was doing a project where we were sampling people's homes for arsenic in their well water, and I had a guy who said, you can collect a sample as long as you do it when I'm not home and don't send me the results. Because this was outside, we're using outside spigots, getting well water. And so at first I was like, why would you not want us to give you the results? Well, it came out then that he was selling his home. And he wanted to be able to honestly put on that form that he knew nothing adverse about his well. And so, you can judge the morality of that, however you want, but that's the reality. Some folks are they don't want to know. Ignorance is bliss, right? And hopefully there's not very many of those folks. I think that they're missing the boat, and especially if they have a family. If they want to do that to themselves, that's one thing. And so of this list, the knowledge barriers going through, I didn't know what to test for. I didn't know how to test. I didn't know I should test. On risk perception, we've been drinking it for years. They don't perceive it as a risk. I don't want to know. It's probably fine. And then for inconvenience, it would be too costly, or I missed the testing program. So in some cases, there may have been, the funding was for a one-time sampling event or something like that. Or I know there's one county in Illinois that offers some testing, but they offer it free the week of Groundwater Awareness Week, which is a National Groundwater Association program every March. Actually, yeah, that's next week or the following week. It's coming up. And then personal social costs too much. I'll wait for others to find problems. So yeah, there's a lot of barriers. They can be overcome as a bottom line. You just need to select what are the strategies you're going to use to try to reduce those and get more people interested in testing or whatever it might be. And again, this project was really about testing, but it's really, from our perspective, it's also about how to get people more engaged in being active in maintenance and stewardship for their well and their groundwater. And so, because a lot of these can be addressed. And again, through all the literature review stuff we did, we also came up with a list of techniques to motivate behavior change. So there's a whole list of those you can download. And then we wrote a summary of what it was based on which research articles it came from. and I'll highlight teachable moments because it's one of my favorite things to talk about. You know, something happened. There was the community water supply found PFAS in their well, or they came out with their lead survey for their community water supply that's nearby, and they've got a lot of lead pipes in their service lines. Whatever it might be, they're talking about putting in, now they're talking about putting in a data center is today's flavor of the month, if you will. But all of those are teachable moments to motivate people to test. And for things that haven't occurred yet, like they're going to put in a giant hog or dairy operation, or they're going to start fracking in an area, the solution is to test first. So you have a background sample. Whether they realize they're actually testing, they never have, just to understand their water quality for the water they're drinking, is irrelevant, really, as long as now they've got a water sample and you can look at that, or they can look at it against health benchmarks and determine if it's an issue. But when those things happen, you need to take advantage of them, because they do end up being an opportunity where people who normally wouldn't necessarily get involved or commit to getting a water test might. It's your chance to, it's a chance to make a new friend, is one way to put it, but it's really about helping them understand that you have their best interests, you care about what's going on, what they're thinking about their well, and that you can be a resource for them down the road. And that's really the message you need to get out there. And you win one person over who trusts you and understands that you're doing right by them, and they're in a position of leadership in an area, then that really is your ticket. They will advocate for you, all those things. I'll talk about that more under partnerships, which is right now. So partnerships are really essential. People who try to do things on their own, you're shooting yourself in the foot, is the best way to say it. Partners can come from anywhere, and sometimes making a program that includes partners makes it more work. You need to embrace that, not go, oh gosh, I don't have time for that. Having partners is the best pathway to success. You don't want to make it easier on yourself necessarily. If you want to be successful, you do what's going to work the best to get to your end goal and show that you're out there doing the right thing. And this all goes without saying that you have to be above board, completely honest, and completely transparent. Someone will find out if you're not, and you'll be done. And even if it's not a pleasant answer to a question that you want to give, you're much better off being honest and transparent in the long run. So it is really critical, especially, with both the people you're trying to serve, the well owners, your audience, if you will, as well as your partnerships. You need to be completely transparent. If they use that in some way that's not beneficial to you, then that's on them. Now you know that that's not a partner you ever want to work with. And there's good and bad partners too, that's for sure. So from the surveys we did, these are all the different partners that were mentioned. Say other here, we did a project working with FFA chapters. I'm a farm kid. I was pretty active in my Future Farmers of America chapter growing up. And so we had a chance to do a project where we could work with 5 FFA chapters. And they were the buy-in for all the people in their school districts, all the farmers, everybody else. We were trying to collect water samples after the floods in 1993 on the Illinois and Mississippi rivers. And so they were able to be that partner. And a lot of these were high school kids. And in the end, we provided them with some resources. We went in and taught class. We held meetings, public meetings where people could come in and ask questions. And, not to tell another story, but my favorite story is we went to this little town that had a school. It had been flooded. Most of the area had been flooded along the Illinois river bottoms. And these 2 farmers, they were brothers, were just a total pain in my side. The whole time I was talking, they kept questioning things. They really just totally didn't trust me and thought we were going to do something bad to them. You know, working with the government their whole lives, I'm sure they've had instances where things didn't go their way. But I brought a bunch of old well logs, some of them from the 1930s, where after the after the stock market crash, the depression, the government put a lot of people to work. Well, in Illinois, one of the things they had people do was inventory wells and create well logs. I don't know why, but we have these old handwritten records from the 30s, a ton of them. So I was passing all that stuff out. And again, these guys, first 20 minutes or so were just a pain to me, really being belligerent. And then one of them raises his hand and he goes, "Where did you get these?" I said, "Well, they're well logs in our files. And we have about 500,000 of them in our files." Blah, 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 explained it. It turned out that the person who did that well inventory in that area was their great-great-grandfather as a young man. And that totally changed their perception of things. All of a sudden, I mean, they were totally taken back, but it, you know, you don't know where those things are going to matter. And honestly, working in rural areas, being part of a farm community, my growing up and being an FFA member has mattered more than once. So, you know, use what you have as well. So we asked them, again, this was all self-inventory in the end because we couldn't talk to them directly. We had to use a survey. We asked them, was this program, you know, not very successful, successful, very successful, or extremely successful? And based on number of partners, how they answered that question, their extremely successful programs had more partners, just plain and simple. They try to do it themselves. That's just like with media. You know, if you put your county health department and you put free testing on your website and don't advertise it anywhere else, how many people raise your hands? Not really. Go to a county or go to their local health district website just to look at information. You only go there when you have an issue. And so it's not a way to advertise. It's just not going to get things done. And again, partners, not only they get you buy-in if it's the right partner, but they help spread the word, they share costs, they can, depends on who it is, and they share effort. You know, folks who are working with disadvantaged areas or low-income areas, a lot of times like, well, these people can't afford treatment. A bank may be a great partner in that instance. Ask if they'll give a couple $1,000s to your project just to cover the initial treatment costs for installing, you know, might be a POU, a point of use device under a sink or on a filter, even a pitcher filter in some cases, right? They have them now that actually remove certain things, and so they just have to use a water pitcher. It's you know, $40 or $50. Those go a long way, and you know, they remove lead, for instance. So there's a lot of ways to use partners and different partners to make your program more robust and actually be a benefit to the people you're working with. I mean, you get your data or whatever you're trying to do, but you also have been a service to all the people that you're working with, and you know, it's a real partnership even with all the well owners. So, as far as best practices, we have a list of those as well. I just showed, you know, page 1 here. Bring stakeholders together can be costly up front, but it's effective in the long run. That's really the message with partners. More partners, the better, especially if they have their own stake in supporting well owners. And if you have to tweak your program a little bit so that they get more buy-in because they're getting something out of it too, it'll be much more successful. It'll reach more people. You'll have more people talking about how great of a program it was and how all the people it did help. Yeah, I mean, it just goes without saying. There's 98 of those, and one of the best practices is to hold single session workshops, which I highlight that only because that's what we're doing here, right? And you know, RCAP folks do these around the country. You can do them in your county. You can have, you know, for a while I was helping Mississippi State. They did webinars in different counties around the state, and they actually had me do online for an hour about our program and all the things that we offer well owners. And then they had somebody come in, a driller or an extension agent or a public health person, and talk the other hour. And, especially with technology today, if you want an expert on a given topic, you can probably get them in, even if they're 1,000 miles away. It's just that simple and it's or that easy now. And also, it's more powerful. If there's a specific issue in an area, you can find the right person, whether they can actually come there in person or not. And the last thing is about trusting relationship. I mentioned that earlier. You have to be credible and trustworthy. You have to be transparent. It takes a lot to earn a relationship, especially in an area where when you went there to start with, everyone assumed you were the bad guy. And so it's really important for those things. And again, as far as advertising methods, there are a lot of different ways you can reach people, understanding your audience. Some people never listen to the radio. Some people only listen to NPR. Some people always listen to the local rock or country station. I mean, all those things, you're not get down to that level of granularity, but you need to have multiple ways of doing things in order to reach everyone. We were doing a project where we sent postcards out to a couple zip code areas where we were going to, I was using college students to go out and inventory wells. And so we sent a postcard out saying we're going to have this public meeting. It'd be great if you came. The 5 students that we hired were going to be there. Where normally a meeting like that, without the postcards and we'd have put it in other things, we'd have had 15 or 20 people there. We had like 85, I think it was. And so they all got to see these young kids and know that, they were going to be knocking on their door asking if they could inventory their well and the location, and if they were willing, take a water level measurement. So we had a better idea of water levels in the aquifer in that area. And it was all because there was a large expansion to a water system that was planned, and everyone was worried that they were going to steal their water and their water wells were going to go dry and all that. And so, we did the work to identify where those risks might be, who might be at risk, who might need their well replaced or might need their pump lowered, all that sort of stuff. But it all started with a big communication effort to do that. And so, again, the folks that said they had extremely successful programs used more advertising methods. That's the data from the programs we talked to. And one interesting thing was on that same set of questions, some of them offered free testing. And you can see here that the extremely successful programs felt like free testing wasn't as effective because the message there really is they have to understand the value to be effective. So they understand the value of free sampling or professional services. Some of them weren't testing. And so the data suggested, no, they don't. What it comes down to is the bottom bullet there. It suggests that demonstrating value is key. Some programs do or did a better job than others at helping well owners see that value. And that is what you have to do. You have to figure out the message on free testing has to be, there's all kinds of little adages out there about, you get what you pay for and all those other things that people say. Well, help people understand why it really is the value if they get a free sample, and what it actually costs and how they're able to fund that, because people need to trust that your motives are there and all those things. So all that matters. And so we also ask, what do you see as an exceptional program, or what were the things that they mentioned? Engage committed staff. They work openly with partners to share those things. They work to identify what mattered to the well owners in advance. And they're willing to change if they need to. And again, they're willing to stick around. So they're, even if it's not about whatever work you're doing per se that dealt with the well owners, that now you've got some expertise and you're there for a well owner if they call you tomorrow or in 5 years. And you need to be willing to always take that call. We get inundated with requests for information because our program's grown so much, and we all try very hard never to say we can't help. And there's sometimes where it's it'd be half of a person's time and we have to say no, but we really try to do what we can and a lot of times those aren't with well owners, but with other groups, sitting on a committee or being on a work group to create a new document. I mean, we try to get involved with all those things, even in other states, because there's value to that. And it also allows us to help put out a consistent message, because I think that's one of the big problems with outreach and with so many folks working locally, is the message isn't always consistent. And so the more we can make that message consistent and have folks providing the same information, the better we're going to be at gaining trust. If they hear one thing from us and one thing from somebody locally that's different, now who do you trust, right? And we don't want that either. And so that's why we try to work with everybody we can. But you should too. So those things I showed with the yellow boxes, one of the questions I asked in the survey when we originally did this is, could I share your answers publicly? And because I figured we have to get the permission, and so it's easier to ask that as the last question. 83 of the 91 said yes. So we have responses to all the survey questions from 83 of the 91 that we worked with. They're raw answers, if you will. So, was your program successful? Why? All that stuff. And so we also have all the information from the barriers, motivations, and communication best practices that I showed a minute ago. Those are the 4 appendices that are in the materials that you can download along with the journal paper. And so everything about that project we've made available to all of you and anyone else that's ever been on this webinar or the 4-hour one we do on outreach, because it's worth a read if you really want to get into building a better program or starting a program on supporting well owners. Then it's worth going through that material. It's just that simple. Because I don't know where it exists anywhere else like that, but there's a lot of good ideas there, and it's dated, as I mentioned, but it's still very relevant. Just like well types haven't changed, and geology doesn't change. It's some things related to groundwater and wells. Some of the information that's out there, the best written stuff is from 50 years ago, and so that's what we use in those cases, like in our class. Some materials are more than at least 40 years. Thinking of a particular document someone did from Cornell back in the late 80s, and it's so well explained and so easy to read. It's really a great resource. So here's question 24 was your program successful or not, and why? Or was it successful, very successful, extremely successful? There's 5 categories. And so this number 83 was, I believe it was Yakima County, Washington. And they said, while we didn't meet our target goal of 250 surveys, we did attain valuable information. Oh yeah, Lower Yakima Valley groundwater management area. And so, they're out west, so there's groundwater law and rules there, prior appropriation rules. And so they learned enough through past efforts that once well owners are engaged and participate, they're likely to promote the program with friends and neighbors. That's what you want. That's exactly what you want, right? You want word of mouth is one of the best things in a local area, where especially when folks don't, in rural areas, a lot of times don't want outsiders involved. And question 25 was, what would you do differently? I think being consistent, slow, and steady to build a reputation, and advertising however you can to make well owners aware. Finding what motivates a well owner or a barrier to their participation is key. So they figured that out afterward. That's what they should have done first. And and your reputation will only grow positively as long as you do all the right things. And you're there for people, and they know they can come to you, and they trust what you're saying. So it's like I said, this material is one of those appendices, and so it's use it. That's the whole point. So I want to talk a little bit about the private well class and what we do. So it's really the answer to the question of what can I do to help well owners understand their wells and water. I already mentioned we do these webinars every month on different topics, but the class is actually a PDF that we send out once a week over 10 weeks once somebody signs up. But we also do a lot of other things. We have podcasts, we do these webinars, we create some videos. We have a private well conference, which I'll talk about in a minute. We're about to have our 6th one in May. It's a national conference. We have people from all over the country attend, and we're all sitting in one room talking about things we all are passionate about. It's pretty cool. This is our website, privatewellclass.org, and here's where you ready to learn more. Takes you to a page where you can sign up and enroll in the class. I would say this is for well owners, but it's also for anyone who wants to go through all the fundamentals, geology, well construction, common problems, treatment, things to look out for, how water gets in your well, a lot of basic information to help a well understand the basics. And the point of that really is, one, it helps a well understand and learn more about their well. Where's their pump set? How deep is their well? Does it have a screen? Does it have a screen and it's only 30 feet deep versus does it have a screen and it's 260 feet deep? All that matters. And so, and we try to explain through the class lessons exactly why and why they need to know those things, and even having the geology on the well log. So you click on the button and it takes you here, you sign up. It asks your first, last name, your email address, and location is just state. And that's really because we're funded by a grant. We have to submit progress reports, and we're supposed to be a national program, so we need to show that we actually have people signing up from all over the country. Not only do we have people from all over the country, from a lot of other countries end up signing up too. I know it's pretty cool in that respect, that we have so many people who are interested in learning more. We created a Spanish version. This was done by a young man who was at the U of I getting a PhD in civil engineering on a Fulbright scholarship, so he had no teaching responsibilities. He's from Colombia, and his pet peeve was poorly translated materials, like from different government agencies and stuff, and he was a perfect fit for us to take all of those lessons and all of those figures and translate them. This is just one page out of the first lesson where he actually took so that top figure came from the Minnesota Department of Health, and he changed it all, and he had a lot of wherewithal, and so we're very fortunate to have him. And so now we have a version in Spanish that you can get to on our website. We also have all these supplemental resources. I mentioned the guy from Cornell. That's numbered like the fourth bullet there, Lyle Raymond, I'm sorry. The two documents that he developed, those two figures, or one of those figures was from that, but they're really well written, easy to read as far as that material goes. So we provide a lot of other materials that supplement what's in lesson 1, which is called the Science of Groundwater, and we have a similar list for all 10 lessons. We also do these webinars. So if you click on free webinars, you'll come to this page. You can scroll down and go through all the different webinars we offer, including all of those we've done in the past. You can find those videos, recordings on YouTube. Some we do over and over because we have new people signing up for the private well class all the time, and it's really for well users. And so it's not, we don't run this program to give EHP CE credit, to be honest. That's just a side benefit. And so, some of these we may do 2 or 3 times a year. But we also work with groups like real estate agents and EHPs, and there's a number of others. We've done work with some of the lab, like the Association of Public Health Labs. We've done a webinar with them, all that sort of stuff. And then further down the page, you can get to all these different ones. Some are one-off, like the Water Well Chemistry 101. We did a webinar with our head of our lab here at the Water Survey. And and so it's just a one-off on some of the water chemistry basics related to different constituents you might find in groundwater. And then like water testing and treatment, we've done that a couple times. But these are all of those. If you click on the plus, you can get to a link to the video. And this is the YouTube page. Is my water safe to drink? Those are all the webinar recordings from that year, I think. It's all pretty straightforward. And that is one of the, is my water safe to drink common questions. You can see how often we do that webinar. But again, it's to help well owners. And we have sometimes between 100 and 300 people show up every month. So I think we're doing something right, hopefully. So We also have a set of, I think there's 21 or 22 now, videos that are on a specific topic. What's an aquifer? What's a sand and gravel aquifer? You know, where should I put my well? The most popular one is how does my septic tank work? And what that tells us is a lot of people have issues with their septic tank, or I'm sorry, I said septic tank, I meant pressure tank. Nobody corrected me. How's my pressure tank work? Or, you know, why don't I have enough pressure? And so one of those two has over 500,000 views. And it just tells us that, you know, a lot of people have pressure problems and there's not a lot of good information out there to help folks about their pressure tanks. And that's changing too, because, you know, now we have these 1 or 2 gallon pressure tanks that are really as a start using a variable speed pump. So the pump provides the pressure and it kicks on every time water's being used, versus how it has always been in the past. You have a large pressure tank that, you know, maintains a low and a high pressure, and your pump kicks on when it needs to fill that and create that pressure back. But otherwise, it's, you know, not running. We do a podcast called Tap Talk, the Drinking Water in Rural America podcast. Now, it's really about all of our programs. We have 2 other programs. We have one for decentralized wastewater or septic systems, and we have one for small community water and wastewater operators. And so we interview folks related to all 3 of those types of systems, if you will. I've highlighted 4 here that were all about private wells. And, you know, Dr. Alan Wolf is head of pediatrics at Boston Children's Hospital, which is Harvard Medical School. Yeah, really interesting guy. He's actually going to come to our conference and speak this year. Brian Swistock's retired, but he was by far the most knowledgeable private well person I've ever met. I leaned on him so much. I miss him, honestly. And Eric Yeage's with the Water Quality Association. You know, they work with all the companies that develop POU and POE treatment. And Dr. McDonald Gibson, Jackie, she's the head of civil engineering at North Carolina State, but she's done a lot of work with environmental justice and also in PFAS. And so, yeah, she's got a lot of expertise to talk about those things and how they affect well owners. Also on our front page, we have this button that says, do you have questions about your well water? Visit our help center. So you click on that. Sally Dolan and Sarah Mandelbach manage that. Sally's developed most of that material. And so if you go to that page, you can either search by keyword, you can call us, you can email us, or you can ask the chatbot, especially if it's off hours and nobody might be around. The chatbot only uses the material from our webinars, our lessons, and the articles that are in here. And so every article, there's about 150. The title is a question, and the answer is the answer to the question, or the content is the answer to the question. And so, for instance, if I say flood, then these come up as individual articles. Is my well safe after a flood? So you click on that, and it takes you to this article. We have one of our short videos about is my well safe after a flood? So the content's there, and at the bottom, which I don't think I had shown here, there's other resources you can go to related to flooding and private wells, and if your well's been overtopped, and what you can do to prepare in advance and all that sort of stuff. So in the end, the goal of our program is these things. It's to support well owners and give them information and advice that so they understand why their well is important, why they really need to understand how it all works so that they, you know, can be prepared when there's a problem, and also what they can do to help protect them and their family from risk, either from poor water quality or from surface influences because the well's vulnerable in some way, or even, you know, they have lead pipes in their home, or you know, galvanized pipe, or whatever it might be. That's our mission in all of this. So I do also want to talk, we do have more information that's for professionals. For instance, NEHA is a partner, and there's a version of our 10-lesson class that's on their e-learning page on their website. And so you can get a CE for each of those 10 lessons. You have to answer 7, you have to get 7 to 10 right, or I think that's what it is, when you take the quiz at the end of each one. But also the Association of State, let's see, what's ASHE is a home inspectors. I think it's the Association of State Home Inspectors, but I'm not sure. They contacted us about having a version of our class for their home inspectors. I mentioned, we already have something up for NEHA. It has to be free. NEHA's thing is free whether you were a member or not. You just have to have a register. You have to create a login regardless, but you do not have to be a member to take those. And so also home inspectors are using that as part of an accreditation they have, but they can take the class on, that's our private well class for free. So, and it generates a certificate at the end, all that stuff. Hosting workshops, I mentioned that already. The RCAP regional staff we work with, whenever someone asks, they're in Kansas or Nebraska or wherever, New Jersey, we can send them to someone who they can work with about, hey, if you're going to have a workshop, we'd love to come, or I can send someone to give a presentation or whatever, or materials that we have, and we do the same thing. So I mentioned the assessment tool earlier, but I'll talk a little more about that. And I needed to change the slide because we no longer support the tablet version because our phones have gotten smart enough and PDFs have gotten smart enough that now you can fill out a fillable PDF on your phone. And so maintaining apps from the app stores is an expensive endeavor. And so we no longer do that. But so let me just get to it. If you go to privatewellclass.org/enroll, you can get to this NEHA thing where you can add it. Again, it says add it to the cart. You have to create a login, but it's free to take for those. And we have a newsletter that's really for partners, not for well owners. And so it's just like it says, it's really the best way to stay connected. All the things we do, we list in the newsletter. We, any event that's coming up, like our conference that's going to be in Missoula, Montana in May, all the information is there. There are all of our webinars, our partner webinars. If you're putting on a webinar or putting on a workshop, it doesn't matter how local it is, we'd be glad to put it in our newsletter and highlight it. If it's just for, I'll say Tazewell County Health Department, which is here in Illinois, and I work with a lot. We'll put it in there if you'd ask us to. Because one is for well owners, I get that, but it's something you can share if you're in a neighboring county or neighboring health district. But it's an opportunity for you to understand who else is in the game, and maybe you contact somebody from Tazewell County and ask to use their slides, or you participate yourself and really like that present, if it's a webinar, those sorts of things. And so this is what our newsletter looks like. We try to put no fluff in it. It's all information that's useful. We have a video usually in there that highlights something about wells or groundwater. Highlight it. There's things like Protect Your Groundwater Day or Groundwater Awareness Week. All those things we try to highlight. And when we refreshed our website, if you will, we went to a new platform and updated things. We highlighted that in our newsletter. It's much more mobile responsive now. So the assessments I mentioned, so we put together a group of experts from around the country, including people like Brian Swistock I mentioned earlier, but from all sides of the private well world. And we developed this tool, and it's really comprehensive, and it's not something that someone without a fair amount of private well knowledge could actually fill out. And the idea is you do this with a homeowner, not that you hand it to the homeowner. And so the goal was to create a tool that could be used by a qualified health groundwater extension person to help well understand what their potential risks and vulnerabilities would be. You see everything when you go up to a home on a private well. Folgers can over top of the well is their lid. It's in the middle of a feedlot where there's cattle. There's frogs in the well. There's just, you can't imagine. We had someone send us a picture from Arizona where all these garter snakes are wrapped around this pipe that the pipe's only an inch pipe coming out of the well, but the hole for the pipe is like 4 inches. And you see all these snakes wrapped up right around this pipe all the way down to the top of the well. Some of those snakes, and they got in there because it's warmer. It's a cold night or whatever. And so, there's snakes in their well, I guarantee it. And so anyway, you see all kinds of things, but plugging that and just all the things. Every well is different. Um, we've seen hundreds of thousands of wells, honestly, and it's amazing how some folks think it's safe or that their water's okay, how it is. So we developed this back in 2016, and there's been a number of versions. RCAP regions have been going out and doing these assessments since then. This says over 3,600, but it's actually over 4,000. I missed this when I was updating these slides. It's really cool. And now they offer a free water test. And it's not just for nitrate and coliform, it's a full water test as part of that. So it's really valuable experience for a homeowner. The person who will come out and do those has some wherewithal to explain, why are we asking, for instance, there's a question on here about backflow devices on outside spigots. Well, when you ask a lot of people, do you have a backflow device on your outside spigot or on your hydrant? They're like, I don't even know what that is. And so it's a chance to explain those things and why they're there, especially someone who's farming and maybe is using a hose to fill up a tank with ag chemicals they're going to apply on a field. A lot of people just drop a hose in the tank, turn on the hydrant, and walk away. That's a backflow problem. That could be getting in your pipes, and you could be introducing pesticides into your home drinking water. That's why you have a backflow device. So, and really, if you're with a health department that does sanitary surveys for community water supplies, which is like a vulnerability assessment every 3 years required by law through the Safe Drinking Water Act, and where someone goes in and they evaluate a water plant, and if there's any deficiencies, they note them and they have to fix them. But for a private well owner, this is all voluntary, and we don't share the information except with the well owner. We give them a report back that includes anything we found on a state website or whatever, like their well log or any information about their septic or whatever it might be, and pictures they took while they were there. In the end, the well owner gets the filled out assessment, possibly a water quality analysis if they did a test, and all the pictures they took, and then a summary that is basically, here's the things that you maybe want to consider changing or fixing or consider testing for because of the type of pipes you have, whatever it might be. So it's really a chance to educate a homeowner with a well, and every well is different, was my point about saying we've looked at thousands of them. I have looked at well over 1,000 wells, I'm sure, and they're all different. There's something different about every situation. But it's also a chance to promote best practices. And now all of a sudden they've got someone they feel like they can contact. So it encourages communication. I've had so many well owners say, well, I can't call my county health department because they might tell me I can't use my well. And we always tell them the same thing. There's maybe 1 or 2 local health districts in the country that can actually tell you can't use your well. They may strongly recommend you don't. We have areas here in Illinois where the arsenic's over 250 or so, and the health standard's 10 for the Safe Drinking Water Act for public water supply. So having 25 times the arsenic isn't a great idea to drink. But in the end, it's up to the homeowner if they want to keep drinking it. They choose to. We'll tell them why that's a bad idea, and so would their county health department. But they can't tell them they can't drink it. And so, it's important to share that information because really, one of the first places a homeowner should go is to a public health professional, and we understand that. And so we work with a lot of county or local health districts or state health departments all over the country. We're all after the same thing, protecting people's health. So for the well assessment tool, we have developed a guide that goes through every single element, and there's over 500 of them, check boxes or fill in the blanks or whatever on that assessment tool. And so this was meant to be a best practices guide on what you should do before you go out in the field, what you should look up related to whatever. Some states have great information about every property, maybe a well log or the septic information or whatever it might be, or local geology or known spills, all that stuff you can look up. And then what you need to do when you're there, and what everyone's responsibilities are, whether you're the participant, the well owner, or whether you're the assessor. And so it's a pretty comprehensive effort. And the idea there was, for folks who may not have as much experience, that's kind of a cheat sheet for them, and they can develop that experience because every time you go to a well, it's different and you learn something. And so, for instance, as an example, when we first started this program, most of the RCAP folks were coming from the community water supply world. They weren't private well experts. We met all the time and once a month. I got questions every week from some of those folks as they were running into new situations they didn't know. And slowly over time, now I never hear from them because they've become the experts. They've seen everything there is to see with a private well. And they're part of our work group now because they have as much or more experience than we do looking at private wells and all the issues that go with them because they're out in the field doing it. And so we also created an on-site just 2 years ago, an on-site version of this to look just at septic systems. So it's an assessment tool, but it's really for the on-site industry, if you will. And so OWTS, on-site wastewater treatment system, we work with NAURA, who's the big player there, as well as the experts from RCAP. Their regions do a lot of this type of work. And so, now we have, it's actually being tested still. We had initially had, this was part of a 3-year program for RCAP to go out in the field and use it and then give us feedback on what needed change. So they're compiling all of that, and we'll have all that information by this September and make an update. But both of these are freely available now, a PDF, fillable PDF version on our website, which I probably forgot to mention. And so is the guide. And so you can find those, on the header on our webpage is, it says for well owners, for well pros. There should be assessment tools under well pros there, and you can download those and take a look. So we put on a conference, I mentioned that. We held the first National Private Well Conference, which I believe has never been done until 2017. That's just specifically about private wells and drinking water wells. And we held that in Champaign over 3 days, 26 talks, drillers panel, some lightning talks, very well received. We had about 125 people. It was really cool. We actually recorded the entire conference. We brought in a media guy from the U of I. He recorded the speakers' video, and tied that to the slides, and now every one of our conferences and every speaker's presentation is freely available on our YouTube channel, and I'll show you that in a second. But so we're about to hold our 6th one, which so far we've had 3 in person and 2 virtual because of the pandemic. So in 17, 19, and 25, we had in-person ones. And so we're going to hold one in Missoula, Montana in May. It's at the Downtown Holiday Inn. We just closed the abstract submissions on the 25th. It'll be the same format, 30-minute talks, 25-minute presentations, 30-minute slot. There'll be a drillers panel with lightning talks, but it's one group of hopefully around 100, 125 people who are all private well focused. And it's a great opportunity to meet folks who are like-minded and doing the same kind of work. And the one we had last year was in Bloomington, Illinois. It's only 40 minutes from us or 50 minutes from us. We hadn't put one on since 2019, and we have a lot of new staff. And so we decided to have it close to home just in case we ran into any issues. It went great. And so, yeah, now we're going to move it around the country like we planned to do to begin with. The first one was in Champaign. The second one was in Pennsylvania. And then last year, Bloomington, Illinois. So take a look at that. There's not an agenda yet. We just closed the abstract submissions. There's a lot of good talks. I mentioned Alan Wolf. He works for the American Academy of Pediatrics too. Very influential guy who is just really a great person and cares a lot about people and private wells. He's going to come and speak. He's going to be our first speaker. Yeah, it's going to be an interesting conference. So I'm looking forward to it myself. It's the one thing I think we can all wrap our energy around. And it usually comes off. It's just a great time for everybody that's there. So the last year's conference, I mentioned we record all those. And so this is our YouTube page. There's a playlist called 2025 Private Well Conference. Wilson Mize, he's on our work group. He works for the state and does a lot of work with private wells and septic systems. And so he was our first speaker. He talked about all the effects of Hurricane Helene. And we actually had 3 speakers talk about that from their own perspectives from different places. And so Kyla and Amanda both also talked about some of the issues they found in their states. And yeah, you can look at all those. They're all recorded. They're all available, complete. Yeah, the complete presentations. So it's meant to be there because we know a lot of local health jurisdictions, whether it's a county health department or a local health district, don't have travel funds, can't come to Missoula or Bloomington, Illinois. And so we want to make those available for everybody that, is working with private well owners. And so that's what we do. We wrote it into our grant to provide that. And so that way it's available to everyone that's, doing the work that we all seem passionate about doing. So the other thing we developed was this brochure, if you will. It's a threefold, trifold. Is your well water safe? This is the outside, if you will. It has our information on it. RCAP's our partner, right? And it talks about the 23 million American households on private wells. And on the inside, it basically says, here's what you need to do as basic steps. You want to be safe, you get it tested, you follow best practices, and you need to learn more about your well. And so, we made this for local health districts and county health departments. That was our goal. Something that, when somebody comes in, whether it's, for a pregnancy screening thing or, a wellness visit or whatever, or if it's about a restaurant and their food issues or whatever it might be, this is sitting in the waiting area and something anybody can pick up. And it's been really successful. We offer it for free. We print it. We have it bound in, I think they're in little binders of 50, and they're available in English and Spanish. And we'll send them to you for free. And that yellow box that's on there is on there to, we also wanted this to be about the local jurisdiction. And so we left that spot blank on purpose so that you can print out your own sticker and put on that. And with your information, your email address, your contact information, or your county's info, or your local district's information, whatever it might be, more than those folks have taken these. We have a number of labs that have asked for them, some other groundwater professionals like hydrologists, and even a few state labs that do testing. One state asked for 2,000 of these, which we provided. All in told, we've printed over 93,000 and delivered them to folks over 5 printings. We've actually requested through our newsletter, if anyone else wanted them, to let us know so we know how many to print. We actually have that list. We're going to print another, I think, 6,000 or 7,000 here shortly. And so, but we do have some available, and again, we offer them for free, and it's also available in Spanish. And so you just need to tell us how many you want, English or Spanish, and we can deal with that. This is an older slide. This is from our newsletter in 20 or 21, I think, September 21. So this is when we're getting ready to do our 4th printing. Now we're on our 6th printing. I just kept it because it's still relevant. The same type of notice went out with our newsletter either earlier this year or right at the end of last year. So that's what I have. And I'll get to our questions. If you asked a specific question about your state or rules in your state, I don't think there were any this time, then a lot of times we don't answer a question when there's a whole group of people here that's about one local area, because it really isn't relevant necessarily to everybody else. So we try to keep it to things that would be beneficial to everyone. But I don't think we had that. If it's a common question, you can get it in our help center. Like, what do I sample for? We get that all the time. We have that listed there for that reason. I will say about our help center, what I didn't mention is we just started in April 24, but in 2025, I believe, if I have this right, those 150 articles got clicked on 161,000 times. And what that's meant for us is honestly less phone calls, but at the same time, the phone calls we do get are questions that are much more complicated, where people can't find the answer in the articles. And so sometimes those take us actually a fair amount of time to answer. We have to go find an expert on a certain thing. The example I've been using is someone from Wisconsin asked us how long it takes for a galvanized pipe to season that's in a well for a drop pipe. I had to go reach out to some folks I know at US EPA's research office who are corrosion experts to find an answer for that. Because as it seasons, it turns out it's releasing cadmium, and that's bad. So it's just, it's really been interesting how the Help Center has changed us as far as what kind of questions we get, the type of things we can deal with. It's good. We're learning too by doing that, but it's a really good place to check for additional information was my point there. So question, do you think local regulatory agencies should do continuous outreach? So, there's 23 million homes, 58 million people. It would be great if every local regulatory agency did and had the capacity to do outreach, had permanent staff for that. It would certainly change, I think, how many people got sick from private wells that had bacteria problems. I don't think I showed it on this talk, but I show a slide most times that all these issues, flooding, Flint, Michigan, and lead, PFAS, all those things are I said earlier, the flavor of the month. But what it really comes down to is most of the problems we have are with poor well construction, where the well's vulnerable to surface contamination, and lack of well owner knowledge. They had no idea that they should be or could be, or they had to fix their well, or they should test, or all those things. If we had personnel at the local level all around the country who could work on those two things, we would see such a huge benefit from it. And the problem is well owners are typically more vulnerable. A lot of times they don't have resources. We get a lot of questions about funding. There just isn't any real good funding out there because there's no federal state support per se for a homeowner directly. There is a program I'll mention in a minute because that was one of the questions, but a lot of times folks are on their own. For every person that's looking for help, we have somebody who has the wherewithal and doesn't want the government or anybody else to help them. They want to take care of it themselves. And so, a lot of legislators, especially at the state level, look at supporting private well owners as not something they should do because a lot of them don't want the government to interfere. They were even trying to get some rules passed probably 15 years ago nationwide to require testing, either at property sale or even more regular testing for every homeowner. There was so much pushback from even homeowners who were like, I don't want the government in my business. It's amazing to me. You think you'd want to know. But again, 8% don't want to know. So I guess they're the vocal 8%. What funding is currently available for those in need of a well repair replacement? So the USDA has a program through the Farm Bill, and they give money to nonprofits, like all the RCAP regions are part of it. So is the Water Systems Council, and I'm sure there's a couple others, where they get money that they can then loan out. It's a 20-year loan. I think it's 1% interest. And so if someone really has a hardship, they can get one of those loans. And the real problem with it is there's restrictions. Right now, the Farm Bill is the same Farm Bill since 2018. It was supposed to be reauthorized in 2023, but our federal legislature can't come to common ground on that. So they've been passing an extension of the Farm Bill every year. So it's still under the same rules that it has been since 2018, which don't help other than septic systems. You can get it for that too. But it requires that the homeowner be at 60% of the poverty level for the area or less. As one person said to me, the problem is we don't have enough people applying because you almost have to live in a cardboard box to be at that low income level to get that funding. So there's so many homeowners that are above 60% of the poverty level that can't get access to that funding. I mentioned Water Well Wish. So my point there was there's been a lot of work done to try to get the new Farm Bill authorized. And for that particular program, they're trying to get it to 125% of the poverty level in an area. And it also expands it to adding treatment when a contaminant's been identified. Both of those would be very positive changes and provide a lot more relief to homeowners on wells if it ever happens, right? And it's these days there's no way to understand what might happen next in our federal government, unfortunately. Water Well Wish is a program through the National Groundwater Association. It's actually through their foundation arm. but it also, their particular niche is that you have to have applied for the USDA program and been denied in order to apply for their program, which the real problem is it's mostly funded by volunteers, drillers, others that are in the industry, and they need donations for that, a lot of it, and they have a lot more need than they do funding, and so they can only do so many a year. But it's a really cool program. If you just Google Water Well Wish, Terry Morris is the person who's executive director of NGWA and runs that. But and we had him on our podcast if you want to learn more about it there, because it's a service. It's well drillers giving back. It's a lot of good things. But we have a webinar that covers not only well replacement or repair, but also testing, well abandonment, and a lot of these are local or state initiatives. And so I encourage you to go to our webinars tab, the one, I thought I had an arrow there, it disappeared, where it says free webinars. If you click on that, it goes to the webinars page, and then if you scroll down, you'll find funding financing options. Now this webinar is from 2022, and we actually had the folks from USDA on as well, but we also highlight a lot of local and state programs that you may not know about. Like Iowa has a program that they fund their counties to provide cost share for like a well abandonment and testing. It's really great. I wish every state had one, but Iowa does. And so, so if you're in Iowa, you can talk to your local or your county health department, and they can tell you all about it and what it covers. And but it's it's valuable for many reasons. Not only does it help a homeowner, but it's allowed the county health departments to develop a really positive relationship with their drillers, which in some states it's a county health department that are getting the permits and are correcting and overseeing well construction, which they're the regulator and the regulatee, and so that doesn't create a real trusting relationship for the drillers. And in Iowa, it's a shining example of how the drillers who are really doing their work above board and are willing to work with the counties are also seeing those benefits, because it's it's giving them work to do too. So, but it explains all of that. Other programs like soil water conservation districts in some states may offer cost share for abandoning old wells. That's a big problem. Some of our other webinars talk about that too. Should an owner schedule an annual well maintenance like represented by our water? Oh, I left a word out here. Basically, they're asking, so they have a plan with a water treatment service. So they have treatment in their home. And one of their gold plan for this particular water company is to schedule an annual well maintenance. So my answer to that is it really depends on what that service is and what it includes. It's always a good idea. I said it's not a bad idea, but it's a good idea to be diligent in evaluating your well. But many of those things are visual at your wellhead. There's certain things you're looking for. They're not going to open your well, or you shouldn't let them. Because anytime the well's open, you probably should disinfect it, because you could introduce bacteria, or they're related to testing. So, and I understand cost is a factor for a lot of people. And, I mentioned the RCAP well program, well assessment program, that's completely free. But it's really about your peace of mind. We have people who would just rather pay. I ran into a homeowner who had literally $7,000 or $8,000 of treatment equipment at home. I'm like, oh my gosh, what's in your water that you needed all this? And their response was, we never tested our water. We just wanted it to be safe. So this is what we did. And they had the money to spend on that. Most of us do not. So it's really a personal decision, is all I'm saying, and for your peace of mind. But, I would think that if someone's going to do an evaluation of your well, it would be a driller or a well contractor. And I don't know what kind of training a treatment dealer might have in that. And now that's a question for your treatment dealer, and also probably the Water Quality Association, which has a training program for those folks. And maybe that's been incorporated there, and I just don't realize it, because the Water Quality Association at least is trying to set a baseline for how treatment dealers need to operate with well owners, and what kind of information they provide, and how they do their business as being professional and all that stuff. And there's an ethics factor there. And so, you run into all kinds, just like you do in every industry. And that's why I'm a little hesitant. But it really matters what it is that they're actually providing. So yeah, you just need to find all that out. All right. So someone asked why you're interested in wells. That's all it said. So what led to your interest in wells? My story is pretty simple. I started working here as a student in ag engineering in 1983. I was a farm kid. I grew up in an old dug well. I showed that earlier. I found that doing this work and getting to do requests when someone asked for a request about water quality in a certain area or whatever it might be, and then later, as I started working here full time, conducting research and working with homeowners out in the country where I grew up, all those things, really, it's rewarding. You're helping a lot of people. And doing that kind of work for over 20 some years really is understanding well logs and working with drillers and well owners and others, and understanding groundwater and how it all interplays and differences between bedrock and sand and gravel aquifers. All the things that we do really provide the background to develop this program in the first place. An opportunity came along out of nowhere. The EPA decided to create a program for technical assistance looking at source water protection for related to private well owners, and we were in the right place at the right time. And so now it's a huge program, and it does a lot of good all over the country. And we are just very fortunate that all those things came into play at the same time. And I know most of you, that's not why you're here, to learn about my story. So I'm glad to have a discussion with anyone who wants to talk about it, because it's been a lifelong thing for me. I've been here 37 years. So, and I still work because I like what I do. So the other questions we got were either really broad and I wasn't sure how to answer them, or my answer is we have a webinar for that. So, how often do I get it checked? I assume my well. How often should it be tested? We have a whole webinar on questions that well owners ask that covers all of that in much more detail. And I encourage you to go watch the webinar because it's much better at providing all of that. I couldn't do that here. And then as far as water tests, we answer that too. And well construction, we have one just on well construction. You need to understand whether you have an old dug well or bored well, large diameter well, or if it's a drilled well, is it a bedrock well or a sand and gravel well? And there's a lot of differences depending on what the answer to that is. And so again, we have these resources, and these last two questions, we will be doing a webinar probably in the next few months that covers those answers in a lot of good detail. And so that's the questions we have. It's a couple minutes till. Let me pull up, where is it? I have it, I know I do, there it is, webinar questions. We do have questions. So let me pull this over on top and make it full page and make it larger, and then we're ready to go. If I can figure out how to do that. No. Where's my Zoom? I'm so sorry. Huh. What am I doing wrong, Katie?
You can probably hit Control and then your little scroll button should zoom it in for you.
Oh, there we go. There, I found it over here.
Yep. Or there you go.
I'll just go to 200. That'll work. I did 150. Okay. I'm in the Northeast. Just had a big snowstorm. Yeah, I've met several people who have been dealing with that. Someone from Providence. What is in road salt? What is chemistry? How to test well for road salt contamination? So road salt is really just sodium chloride. I believe it's not an issue that it's. I mean, the issue is there's a lot of other things that get left on a road. Even tire wear, there's chemicals in the tire rubber manufacturing process that are can be harmful. And so a big snowstorm like that and infiltration into the ground is going to push some of that stuff down into the ground. It really depends on how shallow the aquifer is, how much protection there is. If it's bedrock at the surface and there's fractures, all that matters. But the biggest problem with road salt is in areas like Chicago, where they've been applying road salt for 80 years and tens of thousands of tons every year. We're seeing an increase in chlorides in the shallow sand and gravel aquifers up there. And so some of the communities have like a shallow well that they use for their water supply, or it's used for backup in the sand and gravels. And we're seeing the chloride values getting to a point where you can start to taste it. So it's considered a secondary contaminant. It's not a health risk per se, but you have to treat it or it's going to taste like salt water, is the bottom line. And so it's really, you'll see an increase in chlorides. It's how you test for that. And, you know, I've got a slide for in another presentation, not related to this, but related to some of the groundwater work we do, that shows some of the towns up in the Chicago suburbs where, you know, their chlorides were, you know, 20 or 30 milligrams per liter, and now they're 200. And you start to taste it, you know, I believe just a little above 100 or so. And I think the secondary health limit for public water supplies is 500 maybe, but by then you're really tasting it already. So, why would a screen on a well matter at different well depths? Well, I didn't explain that well, so I apologize. You really typically only have a screen when you have a sand and gravel aquifer. And there, you know, it's just like your screen door. Your screen keeps bugs out and lets the air in. A well screen keeps the sand out and lets the water in. And so the screens are sized. Like I said, we have a webinar on this that explains this in detail. But typically for a bedrock well, it's cased down into the bedrock, and then you seat it, is what it's called. It's basically you use a packer to seat the casing so it's solid into the rock, and then the rest of the hole is just open. You know, a bedrock, you can drill a hole through a rock and you still have the hole there. And the whole point of a bedrock well is you have to find fractures in the rock, is where the water's moving from or into your well. So you can't have casing or water couldn't get in. And so, you know, we run into wells that were drilled, you know, 40 or 50 years ago, like in New York, upstate New York. There's wells that only have 20 or 30 feet of casing, and then it's a 500-foot well. And so water can get in that well anywhere from 20 feet to 500 feet, which means it's not really protective from the surface in a lot of cases. It's likely that there's infiltration getting into that well, versus a sand and gravel well that's 200 feet deep. In my county here in Illinois, the screen's from 195 to 200. The rest of the pipe is solid. The only place water can get in the well is from 195 to 200. So it matters a lot. It tells you where your water's coming from, what kind of aquifer you might be in, all those things. Okay. As we learn more about human health problems due to microplastics, should the AHJs ban plastic piping for plumbing? I'm not sure what AHJs are. I'm assuming it's some regulatory authority.
It stands for authority having jurisdiction.
Oh, thank you. Okay, I was trying to think of a group and I couldn't. I don't think the information is there yet. I mean, the reason we went to plastic piping is because of problems with the other types of pipes: corrosion, biofilm, scale formation, all that stuff. I think there's a lot of people working on that. In all honesty, the associations like the American Water Works Association, they put out all the standards that utilities use. You know, they have committees that are certification committees through some of the third-party certifiers. They make those recommendations based on testing. What's the Water Research Foundation, WRF. They fund projects dealing with a lot of questions like this, and I would guess there's some of those going on. I mean, the bottom line is we have a person here, a chemist, who's a microplastics and PFAS expert, and there's so many places to pick up microplastics. I don't think he would say that you should ban plastic piping for plumbing. And I also think that, you know, those decisions should be made on confirmed findings from research and you know, testing of those pipes. And there's folks doing that, but there's no consensus for sure, or I know it. And yeah, I don't think there should be. I don't mean this in a negative way for you, but I wouldn't do a knee-jerk reaction to these things, because in some cases, it gets in the media and it goes nuts, and we still don't even understand the mechanisms for some of it. And so I would take it from an authority like the plumbers, and they're going to be biased, I guess, but like the Water Research Foundation, that's a question to ask them, honestly. It'd be interesting. They'd probably respond that they have 4 projects going on now with different utilities where they're testing different pipes and challenging waters that are different chemistries and all those things. It's still too, just like for microplastics and PFAS, in all honesty, we're going to be asking some of these same questions in 20 years because they're difficult questions and we don't understand all the mechanisms on why we're seeing them. We know that they're getting into everything and we find them everywhere, but I don't know that even all the health folks doing research can tell you what all the effects are. I know they can't for PFAS because there's thousands of them and we've only studied a handful. So my answer would be that I think it'd be premature to do that because we already know other types of pipes can cause other problems. Okay, I watched the training once that stated our standards for contaminants in drinking water are so restrictive that an individual would have to drink water for over 50 years to actually show symptoms. Do you believe this is true? Well, so the way, there's a whole methodology when we're talking about for cancer, for anything else, that's been set up by health professionals, both at the federal level and sometimes state level. A lot of those things related to water are based on drinking it an average amount over what's considered a lifetime, which I think is 40 years. But I know people have been in the same home for 70 years. And some things are chronic like that, where it would take drinking it for a long time. And other things are more acute. Bacteria is an acute problem, right? It's going to make you sick if there's E. coli in your water. Where if there's arsenic in your water, depending on the level, it might or might not affect you. And the other part of that, and to be fair, is sorry, we're having a big storm outside. The other part of that is we don't understand how it affects vulnerable populations very well. So those things are based on what the increased risk over, say, 1 in 10,000 people would be over, that baseline. And I don't know those numbers per se, but there are some people who would be more susceptible to things than others. That we do know. And so it's, there's certainly safety built in, but to blow it off and say, well, it's actually 50 years, then I'm not going to worry about it. If I had to have a conversation with a gentleman who was on a private well, and this affected me, I'll just be honest, I probably shouldn't even talk about it, who found out he had cancer in 30 days to live. And he wanted to blame his well. He had an old dug well. It was in his yard. It was a low spot. When it rained, it flooded. It's right next to their garden. There's farm fields all around it. He wanted to know if he should test for pesticides so he could blame the farmer with the farm ground next to his property. And so I started talking to him about, and I'm not a health professional. I was there with the county health department. But he asked my opinion, and I explained, I said, I grew up on a farm where we applied stuff around our buildings to kill bugs and everything else. No mask, no gloves, using a hand sprayer. We were all, that's what happened in the 70s and 70s and early 80s. No one knew that all those things were necessarily a problem, blah, 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 blah. And it hit him. Turns out his son had also died at 45 from cancer, which they didn't mention until we were 2/3 into this 2 or 3 hour long meeting. And, he wanted to blame somebody because he found out he was dying. But that's too late. That's the thing. Don't take it for granted and assume it's going to be okay because it's going to be 50 years down the road. The guy was 74 years old, had lived there almost his whole life. And, he found out there's no way to treat it and he was going to die in a month. So why take the risk? Why not test your water? Why not add treatment if there's anything in it? Because you don't know how susceptible you are. Everybody's body's different, all that stuff. So sorry, it's a crazy thing when you have to talk to somebody who has that going on in their lives. Are there any resources available to help income qualified people to properly abandon unused wells? Not federally per se that I know of, but as I mentioned, there are in Iowa, and there are some saltwater conservation districts in some states. You know, for the webinar we do on funding and financing, I scoured the web for over a day trying to find any program anywhere. I used tons of different keywords, water testing, well abandonment, you name it. And yeah, and so I highlighted a lot of those. But you know, it's been a couple of years, and whether there are those programs now, the thing to do is ask locally, and they'll know. Ask your county or local health district, ask your saltwater conservation district, ask your farm bureau, extension, your university, your state geological survey, if you don't have a water survey. I mean, anybody who might be a player in that area, and you know, they'll know. And yeah, that's really all you can do. Again, there just aren't a lot of resources for private well owners. They're not, they're specifically mentioned to not be part of the Safe Drinking Water Act, which covers community water supplies. And, you know, it requires, it's looked at, right or wrong, that private well owners are independent folks who want to take care of it themselves. And so, you know, that's a message we also need to change, because there's a lot of people who may be renting a house. You know, one state has a law that protects a home, protects a tenant on a well, Vermont. That's the only one I know of. So there you have rights in law that if to test your water and other things, where in most cases they don't. My son rented a house in the country here at an old dug well. I wanted him to test it. I wanted his landlord to pay for it. He refused to let me even talk to his landlord about it because he was afraid he'd kick him out. So I tested it anyway. It was positive, and you know, my son moved because I got the health department to agree, our Champaign County Health Department, that they would talk to the landlord as the home being uninhabitable, which that isn't a law. I don't know if they could have really enforced it, but they were willing to go talk to him. But because there's no protections for folks, right? So sorry I got off. I think that's it. So thanks for sticking around. For those you did, don't forget, if you don't get a certificate and you ask for one in like the next week, then email us. Don't email us today unless you didn't mark that when you signed up. If you don't remember, just wait. Katie's great at what she does. She will get it to you if it doesn't show up. But it's a lot of work to go through emails and all those things too. And it helps us if, you know, give us a chance to get it there first. All right, thank you for your time. Okay.